Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. We're here with the M-LEEaD Center, the University of Michigan Environmental Health Sciences Center, and specifically from the Pan-Omics and Data Sciences Core. So I'm Jackie Goodrich. I'm one of the co-leaders of the core.
And I'm Maureen Sarter, and I've been leading the core since its inception in like 2010 or so.
I'm Yue Zhao, and I'm the newest member here. I'm the co-director of the core.
So just for everyone on Zoom or watching this later, just to remind everybody that the Pan-Omics and Data Science Core is available for any M-LEEaD member or people who have a pilot grant for M-LEEaD. We can help you for any of your bioinformatics, multiomics, data science type needs. We have a bioinformatician and data scientist working with us, and you get some analysis for free, actually. So pretty great deal. And do you want to say a little bit what you do?
Yeah, and I can also help. We also help people pick lab methods. You know, if you want to do epigenomics, proteomics, things like that, and you don't know how to preserve your samples or what method you should use, you know, we can also consult with you about that. So to get in touch with us, you basically just one of the three of us.
Yeah, we're listed on the website.
Yeah, or anyone at M-LEEaD kind of funnel you to us, and then we go from there and help you with what you need.
So we decided that, with all of the AI chatbots, LLMs popping up for research, for code and stuff as well. But this session is focused on AI for research specifically, but also all of the concerns regarding it, the hallucinations, the environmental impact, the various other concerns that people have with it. We wanted to address those as well. So the ethics surrounding it. So, what are its benefits? How and when do we want to kind of limit its use? How do you choose which one to use when, and so forth? So hopefully a lot of those things will be addressed during this session.
Yeah, so we have two presentations, and then we'll have a panel with our speakers plus three other guests. So please stick around for that. If you're on Zoom, you can put your questions in the chat, and we'll bring them up during the question and answer times. And
yeah, I think that's it. And so our first speaker is AJ Wing. He has been giving lots of kind of AI tutorials in the Michigan medicine. He also co-teaches a class on use of AI and LLMs, Bioinformatics 535, right? Co-teaches that with Dr. Brian Athey. And so we have invited him here this morning to give the first talk. And then after AJ will be
Mosharaf Chowdhury from engineering, who will talk a bit more about the energy demand of AI and, kind of how to balance and deal with that.
Okay. So I think I can go ahead and get started.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Introduction, Maureen. As mentioned, my name is AJ Wing, and I think Maureen touched on a lot about what our class is really about in terms of Bioinformatics 535. So I have to recognize that there's so many topics to cover, right? There's no way that I can talk about it all in an hour. So I've done my best to try to think about a lot of the different tools that might be of use to you in terms of research. I've shied away from a lot of the coding platforms. I will just touch on it just a little bit in terms of what to think about it, how to think about it, whether it's right for you, those types of things, right? And this is kind of an outline of what I was hoping to cover, a little bit of background in terms of society, and then also kind of applied to research. And then from there, we'll talk a little bit about data security, using these tools and trying to be secure with them, what tools are currently available through U of M. And then after that, figuring out how to improve your communication with the tools, grounding tools for better responses, and then also creating outputs using locally run tools, right? And I won't get into the nitty gritty of that, but I want you to just be aware of all of the things that are out there, right? Because it makes no difference to me whether you love or hate generative AI. I simply want to share as much information with you as I can, so then you can be better informed of your love or hate, okay? Does that make sense? And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the lit research tools that are out there that I find pretty useful. These things are constantly evolving, so it is a full-time job to stay on top of it. My gray hairs grow by the day, no question about that. And then I'll just kind of wrap up with how we can maintain our intellectual footprint, right? Okay. So it's no secret. I've probably heard a lot of talk in the media about how, there we go, how generative AI is going to affect work, right? Whether it's the CEO of Microsoft or the large tools like OpenAI, Claude from Anthropic, Ford, Walmart, all of these CEOs are agreeing that it is going to change the way that people work and the types of work that's out there. And it's really fair to say that it's already found its way into academia quite a bit. You can see it's already an outdated article, the surge in all of these stylistic words associated with generative AI in publications looking across 14 million PubMed abstracts. So certainly not a smoking gun in terms of whether they were using it, but using keywords like delves, for instance, it really skyrocketed. Right? You see that suggestion a lot when you use these tools. Delves is definitely a hot keyword. And I'm sure you've seen in the news all of the funding that is being thrown at institutions of academia, industry, and then even the government. There are deals between OpenAI and Claude from Anthropic with the US government to basically give them all of their tools for $1 in exchange for utility, and then probably access to information, if I had to guess, right? And with that, right, teach an entire course on this stuff. There are a ton of ethical concerns. I can't touch on them all today. Basically tried to wrap it up in a slide, in a sense, for some of the things to think about. So there's a ton of copyrighted material. There's a large ongoing battle with that, whether it be coding or media that's put out there. You can see somebody tricked ChatGPT into making Brad Pitt doing gymnastics, right? Stealing the intellectual property that is Brad Pitt. There are also issues with deep fakes, right? This is a photo of me from the department. I never did the prom queen wave in my life. That was not me, but you can see that it looks pretty realistic, right? A lot of issues with energy requirements, right? And I don't want to steal the thunder of the next person presenting, so I won't talk about that too much. But I will say, as a side note, in my free time, I'm a viral ecologist and I work with the Great Lakes and I do research for them. So it's near and dear to my heart to think about water use, energy use, electricity consumption, all sorts of things like that. And then finally, huge issue, huge debate in terms of how this will affect jobs, whether they will eliminate jobs, create jobs. There are a lot of different statistics out there, and it's really hard to figure out exactly what's going on. And I'd be remiss being a first-generation student if I didn't talk about how income really affects your access to these tools, right? And you can see here a study that was done back in 2021. It shows the exposure to different GPTs by income, and you can see those that make less often have less exposure. We do see a large increase as that as that income goes up, and then as we kind of get higher up, so think more CEO, owner of a company, that type of a thing, we do see a bit of a drop off here, right? But we can see that for lower income individuals, or this is technically true across time, if we look at these technologies, for lower income individuals, they often lag in access to a lot of these tools, right? So it's kind of like learning about fire safety after a house burns down. Doesn't really help you a lot, right? And that's a big issue, and it's something that's potentially an idea that we can address in terms of tool availability and how these tools are constantly evolving, coming out, becoming more sleek, if you will. So there may be access improvements over time. But then it's also important to realize that education, which is often tied to income, has a huge tie to the earnings that somebody has and whether that can be replaced by automation. You can see the typical person that makes a lot more money up here or comes from a postgraduate college background. They typically earn more when the wage change comes across due to automation versus those that were either a high school dropout, high school, or had some college, right? So there is a distinction there, and it's important to think about when you have conversations about these tools in general. And on the note of hallucinations, right, we know that these tools can be confidently incorrect, whether it is convincing a chatbot like ChatGPT that John Cena is the ambassador for the US to Spain, or convincing a chatbot that runs or is a part of a Chevy company in California to sell them a Tahoe for $1, or something more sinister, right? Like using it to outline and define your entire case in terms of a huge prison case in Alabama, where these folks that used this tool and created fake citations and fake cases to cite ended up paying millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of this, right? So this stuff is everywhere. And why does it happen, right? In general, it happens because there's a lack of real-world understanding. It doesn't have the context that you or I have in terms of our life experiences and how we interact with the world. Although there are these things coming out that are world models, where it's supposed to allow these tools to interact with the environment, but that's going to take a lot of development, I would say. It's also important to remember that these tools have probability-driven responses, right? They have probabilistic, non-deterministic outcomes, which means you can use it a bunch of times, and each time you use it, you might get a different output slightly. So it's really hard to replicate those results, which makes it really challenging to use for science, right? We want to be having that quality of replicability. There's also no internal fact-checking mechanism, right? No trustworthiness, if you will. And then there's this idea of reinforcement learning and how that leads to sycophancy, right? These things want to make you happy in terms of the chat or the conversation that you have with them. And what I mean by that is that through this reinforcement learning, they learn right from wrong, in a sense. And eventually, if you get frustrated enough or something, or scolded, right, it wants to give you something that's going to satisfy you. So it might give you something that seems correct, but in fact is not, because it's just trying to make you happy. And there are a lot of examples of hallucinations, right? We've all come across them, whether that's inventing research studies. When you're looking at a paper, it's creating all of these fake citations, false facts as well, and that leads to those confident but incorrect answers. And I talk about all of these things and the hallucinations, but these tools are getting better, right? And if we look at this graph right here, this is just the progress of the top 10 companies in terms of generative AI that are out there over the past 2 years. You can see how many different models they have offered, how many different iterations have become public since that time. And then on the bottom here, we have the release date as well, roughly around the same time frame. All of these different colors are the different companies here. And then on the y-axis, we have this artificial analysis intelligence index. And basically what that means is it puts these tools through 10 different tests, approximates their score, and then it tracks it over time. And you can see overall, they are tending to perform better over time on these set of tests, right? So with that in mind, what can we do to kind of make sure that we are avoiding these hallucinations, or at least pragmatically using these tools for our work? So this technology, right, it has a steeper adoption curve than almost any technology in history. And that's kind of scary. It can be exciting in a sense, but it's scary in the sense that people can be using these tools without necessarily knowing how they work, or just blindly trusting them, right? And even though AI hallucination rates are going down, so you can see it started a few years ago, roughly in the 30 percentile-ish area. And now it's all the way down to, if we look at the average rate for all models in blue here, it's down to about 8% in terms of the statistical likelihood that what it gives you is a fabricated response, right? So that sounds pretty good, but especially with science, right, you want that to be almost zero, right? Big issue there. And you can see the top performing models are under 1%, which still sounds pretty good, but 0.1% can make all of the difference. Even if it hallucinates once or twice in your whole study, that can impact everything that you talk about, right? So as a suggestion for using these tools, right, you should never put any proprietary data or ideas or research that you are doing into these publicly available tools, right? It's really easy to, and maybe nobody would know, but you are entering that data into a public space that can be accessed, right? There are many examples of these databases being hacked. It happened with DeepSeek, it happened with OpenAI, it happened with Grok. Grok released hundreds of thousands of chats from ex-users sending in conversations and asking private questions. And then there's also this thing where sometimes institutions, Samsung had a case where they essentially leaked corporate secrets through this chatbot, and they had to shut down access to it as a whole company, right? So now a lot of these companies are just building their own and trying to keep it in-house, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to put your name on this work, right? So you are responsible for the final output no matter what. And there are so many tools out there, right? This is just a fraction of the tools that are out there. And we talk about a lot of these in Bio in 535, but there's no way that I can cover all of these today, right? So be mindful of that. But be aware that they are constantly evolving, and it's really challenging to keep up with them all. I'm subscribed to like 9 different newsletters to see the latest updates. So when I wake up in the morning, I have 9 different emails from all of these companies in terms of the latest and greatest. And in terms of what U of M currently offers, they have a few different options, a few different flavors, if you will. That being U of M GPT, which you can kind of consider a wrapper to interact with a lot of different language models. It doesn't have to just be ChatGPT, and I'll show you that in a second. M-LEEaD, which if you've created a course or done anything like that, maybe you've used this chatbot to create a RAG-based tool, and we'll talk about that as well. U of M's Go Blue app, won't talk too much about that, don't use it that much, but know that it is a generative AI tool that is out there, offered by U of M. Microsoft Copilot Chat, I do want to touch on that in terms of data security, as well as Google Gemini, which is my personal favorite LLM out there right now. Doesn't mean it's the best, but I like the way that I interact with it, that I chat with it, and the fact that it's backed by a really large company that has access to a lot of data centers, and can constantly improve their models. They just released Gemini 3 the other day. And then finally, Google Notebook LM, which I will talk about in a little bit. And I think it's probably one of the best generative AI tools out there, and I'll talk about that as well. So in terms of the offerings for U of M GPT, right, this is the screen if you log in. They're always updating it, which makes sense because these tools are always being updated. So every time I go to show this slide, I have to update all of the pictures. I have to update all of the bullet points that are associated with it, right? Full-time job. So currently using this, you can use GPT 4.1, although we are on 5.1 now. Llama 4 Maverick, which is actually an open source tool. I'll talk about that a little bit too. You have an image generator, GPT Image 1, Claude 4.5 Sonnet, which is pretty good in my opinion. People really like to use Claude's or Anthropic's Claude tools for coding. And then you have some reasoning models that are really quick, like O4 Mini and O3 Reasoning, also made by OpenAI, right? But as hard as they try to keep up with these tools, right, it is impossible to get all of that infrastructure loaded in here. Like I said, we're already another generation ahead out here in public, and it's kind of like competing with these trillion-dollar companies and trying to keep up with that. It's a really difficult task. So I don't blame them at all for wanting to offer this because you can access it all for free, but it is kind of futile in its attempt to compete with them in that sense, right? And maybe that's not necessarily the point of them offering these things, but it's important for you to know that these do lag. I won't talk too much about the limits on them, but realize that the limits are different for these tools in terms of how many messages you can send, how many images you can create versus those out in the public domain. And then Maisie is a way to kind of create a customized knowledge base, if you will. So if you're running a class or anything like that, you don't need to run a class. You can access this through Canvas. What you can do is you can essentially load in all of your sources, PDFs, lectures, all of those things, lab meetings, that type of thing. And what it does is it creates this knowledge base, and then you can ask questions to it. Now, I will show you Notebook LM in a little bit, and I think it's better than this, but know that this is offered by U of M, right? And one of the big things is that it often has to be linked to a shortcode, which means that it does cost money. Now, there are funds for this through different classes, but realize that it is not always the case. So there is some upkeep that needs to happen, and that does cost money. So the Go Blue mobile app, won't really talk about it too much. I think it's really targeted towards students, and it gives you just access, an interactive way to interact with campus, whether that be class info, Gen AI services, campus info and events, student services, weather, U of M news and sports updates. It's supposed to have location access, so it can kind of guide you around campus if you're lost, but I don't think that's yet up and running. Last I saw, it was still kind of in beta. Okay, so Microsoft Copilot Chat, full disclosure, I don't really use it that much. And that's just because all of these LLMs are pretty good nowadays. But this does have a pretty nice feature that you should be aware of. So this is a partnership with U of M, right, between U of M and Microsoft. And it just looks like a normal interface, like anything that you would use. You do have to access it through the internet, right? So that's also something you can't just run it on your desktop as a little app through U of M. But what's really important about this tool is that as of now, it's approved for high data sensitivity. And that means that you are technically supposed to be able to use data that you would consider proprietary for your projects. Now, I say that, and I would still be highly skeptical, and I think it's a good idea to be if you're not comfortable with that type of thing. You can get some clarification, and I'll show you a website to do that, some people to contact as well, okay? So it's still pretty good in terms of security and kind of being housed within U of M and U of M protections, right? That's the idea here. But like I said, I still think Gemini is better, and there is actually a partnership with Google through U of M, so you can access this tool as well with your U of M account. I have both a U of M account and a personal account outside of U of M. And what's important to know is that really Gemini comes in two different flavors of models. And I actually had to update all of this as well, just because it goes so quickly. But right now they offer what's a fast model. And that's based on Gemini 2.5 Flash. And really, this is going to be best for almost all your work, to be honest with you. 95 to 99% of the things that you do or interact with this tool for, it's going to be great. And then the other option is Gemini 3 Pro, which just came out. It is smashing all the leaderboards and all of the tests that are out there. Really powerful tool, hallucinates the least out of all of the tools, really impressive. Does cost a lot of money to run, although you aren't paying for it through U of M access, but recognize that all of this has a cost when you run it, right? And again, I don't want to steal any thunder about talking about the environment, but it does take a toll. So if you feel like you need more development with ideas, brainstorming, trying to find sources that are out there, actively accessing the internet with that, this might be the tool for you, the thinking version of Gemini. And when you're using these tools, you'll notice there's a difference if you have a personal account and a U of M account, right? So this is my personal account. This is just what the chat window looks like. But if you're logged in through your U of M enterprise account, right, for free, you'll see this little shield here. And that's kind of an indicator that you are within the system's protections, if you will. So always look for that as an indicator when using Gemini. Now, I haven't talked about Notebook LM, but realize that Google makes Notebook LM. And it's also important to realize that these tools are only currently approved for moderate data sensitivity through the university, right? So you really have to be mindful of where you're using your data with these tools, okay? And if you have questions or are a little confused in terms of the data classification types, what that entails, I would encourage you to go to Safe Computing through ITS. Pretty useful website. They do a good job of updating it. And then if you're interested in a specific role, they have a huge list of all of the different types of workers that are out there. I pulled this one for a researcher, and you can see all of the things that a researcher might consider in terms of data types that you can click on and check out, and it gives you a list of different data types too. So really useful to check that out. Okay, before I go on, any questions on the availability through U of M, any of that stuff? I also don't know if I should be saving questions for later.
Yeah, gosh, she's off on a specific Gemini question.
Yeah.
So I guess like yesterday, Google started like importing Gemini, like mandatory training in Gmail. Do you know if like so like say Dana and I are working on a grant together, and I emailed that grant text to Dana, would that then enter Gemini's training data?
That's a good question. So what I do know is that at least through your U of M account, and do you have knowledge on this?
I know.
Yeah, so I know if it's your personal Gmail account, you have to go to settings, and then you have to click on more settings or advanced settings, and then you have to scroll down, and there's a setting down in there.
Yeah, you could turn it off.
You can turn it off.
Yeah, I just turned it off.
So I did that, but I don't know about the UMesh stuff.
It is also on the UMesh one. That's what I was like, oh.
Yeah, and the caveat with that too, with Gemini, is that through the UMesh account, it's not plugged into your email, like the Gemini, the feature itself. So you couldn't use that to make slides or anything like you could with a non-U of M personal account. So it's not plugged into the suite of tools in that sense. But to your question, I'm not entirely sure if they're not just grabbing data without our knowledge, right?
It's moving very fast.
Yeah, right. Could happen behind closed doors, not entirely sure. Other questions? All right, we can keep trucking along here. All right, so let's talk about how you can kind of improve your communication with these tools. Talk a little bit about grounding to get a reduction in hallucination, and then maybe how to think about using these tools locally to best protect your data. So how do we improve communication or prompts with LLMs? The biggest thing to know here is that when you're communicating with these tools, right, you need to use prompt iteration. And what that means is it's a cyclic process, right? You give that prompt and then you get the feedback, you see what it gives you, whether it's right or wrong, how you can improve it, and then you provide your own feedback, right? And it's this back and forth process, just like you or I would have a conversation. I wouldn't just say everything on my mind all at once to you without hearing what you had to say back, right? It doesn't really make sense. And before these tools became a little bit more sophisticated, they had an issue with kind of cutting out parts of a large chat. So they would essentially forget a lot of things in the middle that you brought up, and they would only recognize things at the front and the end. Not as big of an issue now, but it did used to be a problem. So this very idea of prompt iteration basically tells us that the first prompt is rarely the best prompt, right? And you should always realize that if you feel like this tool is good or bad, give it a little more time, right? You actually have to sit down and use these tools to form a strong opinion on them, right? And that doesn't mean that you still can't like them. That's fine too, whether you don't like them or not. So then there are 1,000 of these frameworks that are out there. One of the most popular ones is the CREATE framework, and this basically tells you how to iterate through these prompts, things to think about in terms of communication, whether that's providing context, so giving it background information that you feel is relevant, describing the result, right? What's the format? What's the length? What's the structure? Those things matter to these tools. You can ask it to explain, so you instruct the model to show its reasoning and justify its output. And with that, it's supposed to kind of come with this chain of thought reasoning that I will briefly mention, so that you kind of see in a humanistic way how it's going through the process or showing its work before it gives you an output, right? And then you can define the audience. So what level are you looking for an output in terms of whether it is a high school student, a college student, a faculty professor, something like that, right? It can really dictate the tone of it that comes next and whether that is formal or friendly. And then finally, you kind of ask the model at the end to refine the output based on all of the previous criteria and feedback, right? This idea of iteration going through all of these steps. So then I always kind of thought, why not just ask AI to help us write better prompts, right? Because these tools are trained on all of this data. They know how to talk to one another a lot better than you or I would, right? I think that makes sense. So instead of saying something like, what is the answer to this question? You wouldn't say that. You might say, I want to know the best way to ask this question. What's the best way of framing this question to an AI tool? And you'd be surprised how effective that is. And if you really wanted to get into the weeds with this, you could say something like, hi, you're an AI expert in pick your field, subject, question, whatever it is. You could say, as an AI expert, would you please ask me questions, one question at a time, until you have enough context about my workflows, responsibilities, and objectives to offer a detailed prompt on the subject of my question, right? So that's a lot more of a mouthful, but you'd be surprised again at the outputs that you get. So we know that this conversational process can improve the reasoning of these tools and the outputs, but does reasoning within these tools actually improve internally, right? And this idea is kind of what's known as chain of thought reasoning. I won't go into too much of the detail here, but I want you to know that this is an important part of these tools right now. And there are a lot of different approaches in terms of trying to study the reasoning of these tools. But this whole idea, this chain of thought reasoning, is essentially that it prompts the model not just for an answer, but for the intermediate reasoning steps, right? So you can see here, it's having all of these different quote unquote thoughts, right? And in that way, you're kind of tracking the steps that it's taking in order to give you an output. And the idea here is that it's supposed to alleviate some of the misunderstandings of this black box of AI, right? It's supposed to make it show its work, but be warned of that, right? Because reasoning models don't always say what they think. And this is a paper that came out a few months ago from Anthropic, who builds Claude. And basically what they found is they looked across all of their tools, and they found that even though they asked it to show its steps, oftentimes it wouldn't give the full picture. So it didn't really show its work like they expected it to. And what happens was they would kind of give it hints, and then they would also give no hints, and they would get similar responses. And they would do these types of tests on it. And they found that it wasn't really that successful overall. And the last sentence of the paper basically says, if we want to rule out undesirable behaviors using chain of thought monitoring, there's still substantial work to be done, right? Another issue with trusting these tools. So how do we ground Gen A outputs in truth, right? How do we try and improve or attack this problem? And one of the things that we can do is we can use, as I mentioned before, a RAG tool, or a retrieval augmented generation tool. Now, it sounds like a mouthful, kind of is. Typically just call them RAG tools. And chances are you've probably used something like this before, to be honest with you, whether you knew it or not. It's the idea of kind of having your own database, all of your own data, and interacting with it. But this is a lot more, I would say less nuanced actually, because you can just have a normal conversation with your data and glean insights that way, as opposed to knowing keywords and things like that. So the idea is you build your own knowledge base, right? And then you ask a question, and this LLM actually goes and fetches the information from that knowledge base. And what it does is it actually forces the LLM to only answer based on that information. So it's not pulling information from the internet. It is strictly from your database, right? The idea being that it's going to reduce the amount of not eliminate, reduce the amount of hallucination if it's coming from the information that you've provided, right? And I do think the best tool out there for this right now is Notebook LM. Have people in here used Notebook LM already? Kind of a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So if you haven't, highly encourage you to do it. Maybe you won't like it, but I find it really powerful. So you can make one through U of M, right? Free access to it. You can own up to 100 notebooks. All right. And what you're going to be shocked with, I think, is the amount of information that you can store with this, right? So each notebook of those 100 can hold up to 50 sources. And each one of those sources can hold 500,000 words. That's a lot of information. That's easily a book, right? So 200 megabytes of local uploads for each of those sources. So that's 1,000 single space pages, roughly, if we talk about 500,000 words. It's a lot. So it is similar to M-LEEaD, but I think it's more advanced, and it's also free, right? So that's a big delineator, in my opinion, with this. So with this tool, certainly don't have enough time to walk you through all of the nuances of it, but I wanted to summarize a few of the benefits of it, in my opinion. Say you feed in all of your sources. Maybe you're interested in what I was looking at, which was the All of Us research data set, the data program. And I just fed in a bunch of different articles. Now, these articles can be PDFs. They can actually just be links from websites. You can even feed in YouTube videos. This thing will take those, right? And then you can just ask it some questions or click on some buttons here and say, create a briefing doc for me. Give it a minute. It will go through all of these sources and it'll give you a summary written up for all of these sources that you have plugged in, right? Another thing that you can do is you can ask it questions, right? So just in the chat window within Notebook LM, you can ask it a question that you're curious about. And what it does is it gives you a response, but then it also gives you citations within that response, right? And if you hover over and click on one of those citations like I did here, what you'll see is it actually jumps to the source that it came from and it highlights the section that it pulled that information from. And that's pretty valuable, right? Because every time that I'm using these tools, I'm always just like, all right, this makes sense, but like, where is it coming from? In the same way that when you're doing a Google search or something like that, now there's the AI tool at the top. It gives you a summary. It gives you those little links. You jump to one of the web pages. It makes no sense, right? So you really have to validate these outputs that it gives you. And this is a nice way to do it in a sense. And that's not to say that it won't hallucinate, but at least it's telling you where it's pulling it from so then you can make that determination. And that, again, allows you to verify whether it's accurate information or not, right? Another thing that you can do is you can create these mind maps. It's just a lot of different ways to interact with the sources that you have, right? So you can make this mind map that basically layers all of your sources and then connects them. And then if you were to click on any one of these, it kind of gives you a little bit of a description for each of these cells within this flow chart, right? Another thing that's pretty popular, and I don't know, I'm curious if I play audio, if it will work, but we'll see. I'm not sure if it will, but we'll try it anyway. You can actually create a podcast of all of these different sources that you feed into it, right? And that's actually useful in the sense of whether you're on the go or in between meetings, or maybe you didn't get a chance to read a paper like you should have. You get a nice little summary that I think does a pretty good job. We'll see. Oh, we'll see if I can get it to play though here. Won't take up too much of the time. Maybe. Oh, bummer. Well, I was hoping that we could all enter the matrix together for a little bit, but I think we'll have to save that for another time. I would encourage you to do it because the first time that I did it, I was blown away.
We're sure that being genuinely well informed.
So let's just hear a little bit of it, like a minute. Starting off well too.
Many have what's called post-zygotic mosaicism. Think of it like a genetic blueprint where the spelling mistake isn't in every single copy, right? But only in a certain percentage of cells, like a patchwork. Okay. So it's there.
So this is sources all from all of us
The
research.
genetic change is there, but it's not universally expressed.
I didn't do anything.
Making the risk sort of hidden from classic diagnosis.
Yeah.
And critically, even without the full-blown syndrome, these incidentally discovered variants do contribute to an increased risk of other cancers in the general population. It fundamentally changes how we think about population screening, doesn't it? Many people might be carrying this silent blueprint for increased cancer risk without ever knowing.
That's a huge shift, yeah. Uncovering this kind of silent underlying genetic predisposition that's far more widespread than we imagined. It makes you wonder, right, how many other conditions might be hiding like that? And it's not just NF1, is it? Are we seeing similar things with, say, thyroid cancer? Absolutely, we're witnessing a very similar pattern. Major thyroid cancer-associated syndromes like MEN2, that's multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2, and PHTS, PTN hematoma syndrome. Well, they're far more prevalent than we thought. Studies in all of us in UK
Okay, so pretty good. Doesn't sound like robots. Sounds like real people, right? And there's this back and forth candor that happens. So I was certainly impressed. And it doesn't mean that it always gives you completely accurate information. But most of the times that I've used it, I've heard maybe one or two people say that it did some things that it wasn't happy about. And there was a big issue with sexism with this tool at first, because it always felt like the lead podcaster was the male and then the female podcaster was kind of following along and asking the follow-ups and those types of things. But I think they addressed that. That said, I'm not a spokesperson for them, so don't hold me accountable for that by any means. But realize that this is another way that you can interact with these sources. So I've kind of thought about it before, like you can collect all of these different papers, right? Kind of condense them. Why wouldn't you do that for a research project, right? So the idea being that you create what's known as a project notebook with this. And what you've done is you've created your own knowledge base, or a knowledge graph, as some people might call it, and you fill it with all of the details of your research that you're comfortable with. And that can look like a lot of different things. Whether that be papers or lab docs or code libraries, anything like that, right? And essentially what you've done is you have eliminated this issue. Oh, I should talk about this. Before that, what you want to do is you want to pack this thing full of as much information as you can, knowing that you only have 50 sources. So one way to do that is to consolidate sources. So if you have like a lot of lab meeting minutes or something, putting them into one Google Doc, right? Because then that's going to consolidate it. You can load, that could hold all of your lab meetings, I guarantee it, for years. Just one Google Doc. So then that's just one source. So you could do that with 50 different sources. And basically what this does is it allows you to interact with your project and all of the details in a more intuitive way. That's kind of how I think about it. There's no more Command F or Control F like we're all used to doing when we're searching for a keyword, right? Instead, you could ask something like this, what was the sampling procedure we used to help avoid population level biases? Something like that, right? You don't need a keyword, and what it'll do is it will jump to all the different sources that are related to that. So then you're finding and interacting with that. And you can also ask questions about code that will allow you to do that as well, right? So it's an entirely different way to interact with your project. But again, be careful about the data that you are inserting into these tools, especially those that aren't within U of M's system. And the whole idea of this, right, is that it kind of gets rid of the boilerplate process, which is essential for some people, but after a certain amount of time, when you're comfortable with that boilerplate process, then you can analyze all of it and you get to spend more time doing that, right? But you still have to vet everything. So then what can we do to better protect our proprietary data if we want to use these tools, right? And one thing that we can do is we can run these things called locally run open source models. And the difference is a lot of the tools that we hear about, whether that's Claude or OpenAI's, ChatGPT, these are all proprietary tools or closed source. So that means that you basically don't know how they work. They remain a black box. When you use these open source tools, though, it allows you to look under the hood. And that means that you can see all of the weights and the parameters, how they're being used, whether that makes sense for your project. You can also create your own open source model as well, based on the work that you do, right? Now, there is a bit of a learning curve. I'm not going to lie, so I wouldn't just jump in and create your own model like that. But know that you can download these tools and run them locally. And although, generally speaking, proprietary models, those really big models from those huge companies, they do perform better. So we have the proprietary in the black here, and we're looking at the intelligence over time. You can see it's going up. But the open open source tools are actually doing a pretty good job mirroring the progress here as well. And some of the big open source popular models are DeepSeek, Qwen, Llama, and Kimi, a lot of Chinese models actually. I would say that they're really leading the charge in terms of smaller, more compact, efficient open source models that aren't as large, that don't take up as much energy, and it can be more specific to a given project that you use, right? And then when you look at the intelligence over time, if we looked at the open source, right, you can see they're kind of speckled in with all of these closed sourced in the black, right? So they're doing a pretty good job in terms of outputs when we consider things like intelligence. One of the biggest things that I really like about these tools that you have to realize is because you run it locally, you don't need to have it connected to the internet. Right, so you can run it on your laptop. It doesn't need to be connected to the cloud. You can run it on a local server if your lab does that type of thing. So no internet or provider permission required. And then another nice thing about this is that computationally speaking, once you've downloaded this tool and you're running it on your own laptop, not connected to the internet or anything, you can ask as many questions as you want, right? You can ask as many as you want. Now that does take up energy, right? So do consider that. But you aren't limited to a certain amount of questions a day or anything like that, like you might be with some tools. But these tools aren't without their shortcomings as well, right? So there's always like a caveat or a catch to a lot of these. So when you run these models and use them, recognize that you are the one responsible for any updates or the upkeep or downloading a newer version, right? It's not going to just be rolled out automatically for you like these larger companies would do. And then some of these open source tools that are pretty big, some of these models, they do require a stronger computational hardware, right? And that's why our friends over at NVIDIA are worth $5 trillion right now, right? It's because they are selling out faster than they can make these types of GPUs, TPUs a little bit there too, although Google mostly makes those. So there are some big requirements for a lot of these tools, but that doesn't mean that you can't use them on your laptop. You'll just run a smaller model. And as I just showed, those smaller models can still be pretty efficient and pretty intelligent. And I think there are a lot of different tools out there to try and bring these models onto your computer, but the three most popular that I would recommend are Llama, and that's really great if you want to use it for coding projects because you can connect it right into the command line interface, and that allows you to access files and all types of things like that. LM Studio is basically an app that you pull onto your laptop and it allows you to download models that way. It's a lot more intuitive. It's basically just like a normal chat window that you have with one of those larger models. And then anything LLM is for the people that really want to do a deep dive into it. You can actually just like host it on your computer as an app. You can pick which model you want to use, just as you would with LM Studio or Llama. And then you can run RAG tools, so you can ask it to refer to a knowledge base that you have, or you can actually run agents locally. And on the note of agent, right, these things are no longer so futuristic. And what I mean by that is there are some things they can do pretty well now that you'd be surprised by, but overall, there's still a lot of work to do in order to make them, I would say, work level replacement for a lot of jobs out there, because there's a big fear about that. Makes a lot of sense, right? But I would say there's still a lot of progress that has to be made in this field before that happens. And these are just a few of the popular tools out there. Claude Code, somebody actually ran it on their own computer in their command line interface and had it play Pokemon. It beat Pokemon on its own without any instructions. Took it about 80 hours, but it was able to do it. It reasoned, it figured it out. Got into a few death spirals here and there, but it still beat the game. Lovable is a really popular one for web development out there right now. Pretty intuitive because you just have natural language processing. So you're just sending messages, describing what you want, and then it's trying to build this site for you. More on that in a second. And then Manus AI, which is one of the most powerful agentic tools out there offered by China right now. It's actually just considered a general AI agent, so you could run it on your computer. You could actually walk away and it would still just run it for you. So you could close it down and it would still carry out tasks, which is kind of scary to think about. But realize that it is an option. But on the note of all of these agentic tools, right, or generative AI assistants in general, we think about it as it's going to create some utopia, right? It's going to increase our productivity. We're going to have more time to play pickleball, go to concerts, do more gardening, all of those types of things. But there are some realities that are actually plugged into all of this. Whether it improves our learning is still a question out there because it can be considered a learning aid. It can also reduce errors, even though we may blindly trust some of those hallucinations. And it could improve our collaboration if we're annotating all of our work using these tools and allowing other people to see that, and that improves our back and forth. But the reality is that oftentimes with these, especially agentic tools, you've come across this 70% problem. I don't know if folks have heard of this before, but basically it's really good at doing a lot of the low-level, low-hanging fruit tasks. And it can get you about 70% of the way there. Like a tool like Lovable, I've played with this before, and I always run into the same issues. That last 30% where you're adding your expertise or your information or the critical thinking that needs to be done, it really struggles with it. And then that's when you as a user still have to be plugged into it to actually make a nice web page or a nice tool, right? And this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been happening as long as programming languages have been out there. There's no silver bullet to just do everything for you, right? And it can lead to the two steps back pattern, where if you're blindly trusting it, then it's going to cause you more of a hassle than it would if you just had done it on your own, right? Not always the case. And I would say in general, these tools, if you're using them for certain use cases, are very good. They can save you a lot of time, but do realize this is an issue. And then the learning paradox, right? If you just blindly fall or lean on these tools, are you actually learning? We'll talk about that at the end. So then just some academic lit research tools that are out there that can maybe boost your efficiency. Want to touch on those while I still have a little bit of time left. So Consensus is probably one of the more popular ones out there. I'm not a huge fan of it just because with a lot of these tools, there's tiered access, not gonna lie to you. So I always do my best to find tools that are free out there because I don't want a student to pay for a single tool if I can help it, right? Why would I promote that? Makes no sense. They already pay a ton to come here. So, with this, Consensus is pretty nice because it gives you a really good brief overview of a given article or a list of articles. And you can see that it kind of creates this table structure so that you can quickly compare all of the different tools that are out there. SciSpace is one that started off really strongly. I think it's been passed by a few tools, but what's nice about this in comparison to Consensus, which I just showed you, is that it gives you larger summary tables and you can actually add columns of interest like the TLDR or the methods of the paper, and you can compare all the different methods, right? It's really useful and intuitive in that sense that it allows you to just quickly compare a lot of different papers. But I think Elicit, which was really lagging at the beginning, has come a long way, and it's one of the better ones out there specifically for looking at paper citations, things like that. Because what it does is it gives you a nice summary table, that is, of many different manuscripts, but then it gives you a nice review at the end. And what it does in that review, although I would say by no means is it publication worthy, not by any stretch of the imagination, but what it does is it pulls all of the parts of different papers that it used, and it shows you exactly where it came from, right? And that's really useful. This tool takes the longest to run also, so keep that in mind when you are using it, but it gives you a pretty nice, intuitive, interactive output in the form of a report. Stanford's rolled out a tool in the past few years called Storm. They're trying to regularly update it. They would consider it agentic, but basically what it does is you ask it a question like, what are the current DNA sequence-based foundation models? Something like that. And it gives you an okay summary, I would say. It's something that if you didn't have a lot of knowledge on the topic, it does a pretty good job of describing it from a large overhead view. Semantic Scholar, I'm sure we've all heard this before, but maybe you didn't know that there's actually a generative AI feature that's plugged into it. And what I think is really nice about this tool is that if you are looking at the PDF of a paper, it will go through and tab all of the different areas that are related to a result, a method, a goal, anything like that, right? So that can kind of help save you some time when you are skimming through all of these papers. TrueCite is one that just came out rather recently, and this is supposed to help address a really large issue, which is all of those fabricated citations that we always see whenever we ask for reviews or reports or anything like that. So I created a GenAI report from a topic, and then I fed it into this tool. And what I found was that it had a pretty good method for detecting whether they were real or fake citations. So roughly 80% of the GenAI outputs that I got were accurate, but that still leaves 22 that were fake, right? So that's still a pretty big number. And this one is also in a paid tier subscription, but you get to use it quite a bit before it asks for anything. So that is one plug that I would say for this tool. Cite AI, not a lot of free use with this one, but it might be the most powerful one that's out there right now in terms of looking for smart citations. This is just what the interface looks like. It has an assistant feature, a search feature, a tables feature, so you can ask it all of these different questions. It gives you a ton of different papers. But then it's something that I noticed that was kind of interesting is I pulled up a paper that we published recently, and I saw at the bottom for all of the citations and the downloads tracking, it actually is used by a lot of different journals too. So these journals are using these tools as well, if you didn't already expect that, right? So then this is a really cool one. It's called Insightful. I think it's kind of replaced a tool called Research Rabbit that was really popular for this. I think it's kind of replaced it in terms of what it offers. And what it does is it allows you to pick a seed paper. So maybe you're just interested in a genomic model, EVO2, like I picked one, and then it comes up with this seed network based on this seed paper. So you can see all of the related papers that are here. And then it gives you that list of the papers as well. And then you can also create a network out of similar papers. So you can kind of expand and grow your tree or your network of all of these papers. And what's really nice about this, in my opinion, is that it can give you or tab important papers within this network. And that's based on the amount of citations. So, that is a little bit of a discretionary choice there. But then also it gives you the most recent papers. And finally, which I didn't show on here, it gives you a list of important and recent papers, right? So if you want to set a cutoff date for 2024 or something like that, it can do that for you. And then I would say, and I would end with this lit tool. I think this is the best one out there right now. And it's called ASTA. And it is created by the Allen Institute, if anybody's heard of that before, out on the West Coast. They did a lot of work and still do a lot of work with brains, but now they also do a lot of work with AI. So they rolled this tool out, and you can essentially find papers and you can summarize literature by asking a question. So you can ask a specific question, and it gives you what I would say is a really, really thorough review, like pretty good. Pretty good. Still not publication worthy, but the citations are real. It makes sense when you read through it. It's pretty good. And then find papers. When you do this and you search for a paper or something related to it, it gives you the relevance of the paper, whether it's perfectly relevant, somewhat relevant, or not relevant at all, right? So you can quickly weed those out. It's a way to filter out a lot of papers really quickly. They don't make sense. So this tool, I would highly encourage you. If you didn't use any other academic lit research tool, I would use this one right here, just to check this out, right? So check that out, see what you think. All right, so then just kind of wrapping up here. Oh, perfect. There's a big question to think about, right? Where's the line drawn between AI as an ethical assistant and AI as an unethical author? And I've done a lot of guest talks for different classrooms, and I ask this question, and I'll go up to a board, and I will basically put author, not author, and then I will list all of these different tasks, and I have students pick where it goes on the spectrum, and no two ever look the same. And by the end, it's really hard to pick a line to draw in terms of where it goes, right? Because we've all been on papers where maybe we collected sources from Google, right? And that gets you some sort of authorship, a middle author or something like that. Or you sample and you collect a lot of samples. Even though you didn't write the paper, right? You were part of the study, right? So there are really technical issues to think about when assigning this. But the way that I think about it, and I always use this analogy of Theseus's ship, if people are familiar with that, where it's this ship that goes on all of these voyages, right? And over time, the boards have to be replaced one by one because of all of the repairs that need to be done. And at some point, it's no longer the same ship, right? So you can see the analogy I'm trying to make, where if you've written something, you are doing all of this work. At some point, if you use AI to replace all of those planks, all of those lines, sentences, ideas, it's no longer really your work, right? So the two main points of this is that the authorship on a paper, it needs to have accountability tied to it, right? So you need to be able to answer for all of those different things that were done in the study. And that's something that AI really can't do. It can't vouch for the integrity of a study. And then also, in terms of thinking and using it, trying to not be replaced by these tools, right? The struggle has to remain real in order to avoid cognitive offloading. And what I mean by that is if you want to use it to replace all of your writing, well, that kind of replaces thinking because writing is thinking, right? In order to do that, in order to write well, you have to think about it. And if you're just relying on these tools, are you really thinking? So I would encourage people to still be skeptical of these tools. They're growing more powerful and they can help you with a lot of efficiency. But accountability and skepticism are indispensable. And I think this is a really good quote that kind of gets at the heart of it. And it's from Roger Lewin, and it says, "Too often we give children answers to remember rather than problems to solve," right? I think that makes a lot of sense. Even the way that we structure exams often, we are asking folks to memorize things as opposed to apply it. And that can be really difficult in terms of the learning process. And then I would just leave you with this thought, right? When using these tools, remember that true learning is about gaining skills and for problem solving and systematic thinking, right? It cannot replace critical thinking. And if any students are out there, or if you have students in your lab that are interested in a lot of the things that I've talked about today and want to learn more, I would encourage them to sign up for Bioinformatics 535, offered every single semester. You'll see me there every single semester. And we will have a lot of fun talking about all of the tools that I showed you and a lot of the tools that I couldn't show you. And then we'll also talk a lot about ethics with this stuff too. All right, so think about that. All right, any questions on any of that? That is my time. I appreciate everybody listening. Can't see. Please share materials. I can do that. Any thoughts, questions, follow-ups on any of that? Yeah.
I'm wondering how you think of like inequity of using the AI. So for example, like maybe people from like let's say like some people have more advanced laptop, they can like running the like standalone model, while on their laptop, or someone don't have like a good laptop, then the people cannot, like the person cannot run like standalone like model on the laptop. And also in like the lab level, some lab may have like a lot of fundings that can support them to like rent a lot of like RAM, and some don't, and this will cause like the difference in their research and also like in like when they're like studying like for the person. So like, what do you think of like people can like just like fix like this like inequity for the person or not, like in the like beneficial like status of using those resources?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the current issues with a lot of this. There are a lot of labs within our department that run basically their own hardware. They're funded for it. They can keep everything local. It is a big issue. And then a lot of students that come in, they might not have the largest laptops. Maybe they don't have a laptop at all, right? That's a big problem. Those are things that I can't solve for you, but I have thought a lot about that. And I think where it starts to kind of level out is just in terms of model efficiency. And what I mean by that is a lot of those smaller models that are rolling out, whether it's DeepSeek or Kimi or QWEN's models, they're really good. Like, it's really impressive, to be honest with you. They may not have as large of databases, but they've been trained on 1/100th of the money. So that's a way to think about it in terms of cost from a high level system. In terms of a lower level cost, it is nice that U of M provides tools and provides this security enterprise. That's one way to address the inequity of not being able to afford access to it. But it's something that's, unfortunately, it's going to remain a problem. But my hope is the efficiency of models, and then also, yeah, I don't want to say any more about like all of the energy stuff, but we have a whole lecture on that as well that I'd be happy to talk about in more detail later. Yeah.
Thanks for this great presentation.
Sure.
I have a more technical question, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So the Google Notebook sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
But what kinds of information would be safe to use it online instead of trying to do it like locally?
Yeah. So for instance, I've never like uploaded my own code to it or anything like that. Maybe I'll put akin code chunks or something like that, where it's like a similar idea, but not really what I'm doing. But in general, I think it's great for collecting papers related to your project because it just gives it context. It gives you an idea of what you're interested in, more or less. Anything that's publicly available, I would say, is great. So if you've had a grant that's gone out and it's accepted or something like that in a public domain, I would consider that stuff safe because it's out there already. But yeah, proprietary stuff or ideas that you think are going to elevate you or the field or anything like that, I would still hold those pretty tight and figure out ways to ask questions to these tools that you can still get the question that you're asking without introducing that proprietary knowledge. Yeah, it is a game of cat and mouse, no question. It's a good question, though. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question about education.
Yeah.
So I teach in biostatistics.
Yeah.
And we do ask them to derive some technical stuff. Mm-hmm. Just as you said, without struggle. if they're protected from the struggle, they want to understand the core technical idea. Like some of them don't even know what compounder is.
Yeah.
They don't know the consequence of not adjusting for that, for example. But now they can put the question I gave them into ChatGPT or Gemini, and they can submit the solutions. And they can modify the answers in a way that look like it's human written, or they just, describe it to their own favor. I wonder, because I'm a big proponent of wanting students to be the super user of Gen AI, because I believe whoever masters this is going to be reaping a lot of benefits. But at the same time, we don't want to graduate students who can do nothing.
Yeah.
So that's a concern. I mean, I wonder, do you have any thoughts? Because this is an important class in your department, but what's your recommendation on evaluation, especially in teaching? How do I know the student actually mastered it without being like a police around, hey, did you use Gen AI?
Did you have a thought to insert before I answer?
Yeah, as a student, I have to say, you have a lot of way to cheat if they don't want to learn. So, for example, before the ChatGPT, I use something called Quizlet, which we have a textbook code for doing the homework, and you can find all the questions and the related answers on the Quizlet by searching. So I feel like it's more about how college are teaching students to use the tool to teach them this is something as your assistant, not get your the ChatGPT cannot get a diploma for you, but more assistant. So that's my thought.
So you're on the ethical side, and I think you're probably the on the trial. I don't worry about it. I think that's actually my view too, right? But I wonder, in general, maybe that's your question. How do you guarantee there's a fairness in terms of evaluation? There's students who work their ass off to get A, but there's students just 5 minutes GPT, homework 100%. I mean, how do we deal with that? This is kind of a question I believe many instructors are asking. We don't have a lot of good solutions, but this is actually happening in classroom. And there are students coming to my office say, Junkai, I'm super stressed because I am not using Gen AI to finish homework, but I know my peers do. Do you have any measures to make sure that it's fairly evaluated? I don't have a good answer except to say that, this is a big question.
In person, pen and paper.
Back to blue.
Yeah, that's.
Sorry, what was your name, by the way?
Tina.
Tina? I think Tina said a lot of very true statements, especially if students want to cheat, they will. I think that's a fair assessment. I assume or look for the good in the students, right? But it's obvious that some will cheat. There is no question about that. If they want to learn, they will avoid cheating, right? And I think one of the biggest things that we're failing at right now, in my personal opinion, university-wide, is to have some blanket statement for a class or classes, right? I think it truly needs to be course specific, where you are defining your own level of how often can they use Gen AI? Can they use it at all? Maybe some classes they don't want that. That is totally fine, right? But then it does go to in-person examinations, oral exams. But if you have a huge class, that's an issue, right? Really challenging to run an oral exam like that. But I've actually been writing quite a bit about this. And one thing that I think is really important to emphasize is process over product with a lot of these tools. Truly showing how you worked through it. Yes, ChatGPT can do that for you, but in an in-person setting, I think that is one of the better ways right now. There are also ways to design assignments, I think, that can be AI-free zones. I don't really like that's kind of a tacky way to say it, but just these different ways of developing somewhere it's totally useful, and then where you really emphasize critical thinking in other parts of it, just to really hammer home that, look, you could use this every single day for every single thing if you wanted to, but how is that going to better you? How is that going to make you more competitive in the job market if everybody just does the same thing? Which I think is a totally valid question to ask. I'd be happy to chat more about that because there are some things that I've thought about. But yeah, there's nobody out there running a system that's bulletproof right now. I can promise you that. Christina?
I do have one quick thought because I'm a lecturer, I teach as well, and I struggle with the same questions and the same situations. I think giving the students some questions that they could answer and walking them through the answers helps them understand, and then having them ask the questions and answer them will motivate them because that comes from them. Very practical situations. Do this for your project.
Yeah.
That can make them less tempted to use the.
I think also the way that I always know if I have learned something is if I can teach it, right? And I'm not saying I want them to replace us by any means like that, but there will be more teachers needed in the future. If you can teach something, then I know that you know it.
Yeah. Very quick follow-up.
Yes.
5 seconds.
Yes.
So there are situations where I don't want to use some generative AI, but like, for example, finishing a kind of important assignment. But there are questions they actually can ask generative AI, but they don't. Like, hey, what's the concept of this technical term, right? So they'd rather have person-to-person interaction instead of having a generative AI conversation. So it's interesting kind of sometimes when they use it, maybe for getting scores, but when they actually have to learn, they probably just, hey, let's just ask the teacher. But it's a good comment. I'll think along this.
Well, let's thank AJ again for that great presentation.
Folks online that I didn't get to answer those questions, but maybe they can come back up during the panel discussion.
Yeah, so I think I want to give our next speaker time. So for the questions in the chat, we'll start with those perhaps in the panel. I want to bring up now Professor Mosharaf Chowdhury, who's come over from North Campus from Computer Science Engineering, and he's going to cover a very important topic that's near and dear to us in the EHS department too, kind of thinking about the energy costs and that side and how that can be improved.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. This is something also very close and near to my heart. We've been working on it on sort of how to optimize the energy consumption of AI before, all of this Gen AI even happened and people were sort of not necessarily worried too much about because the models used to be small and then we saw this all of CNNs and RNNs for image recognition and so on. They never sort of consume too much power or energy, especially when you think about sort of at the scale that we are seeing today. But we sort of observed this type of trends, but we saw that even the small models were being trained on more and more data. So even if the model were small, you needed more data to make them more accurate. But at the same time, there were some glimpses that models slowly were growing larger. Then there was a rapid explosion of model sizes, but all of them led us to start this ML Energy initiative, as you can see in the model, in the middle of the slide. And we tried to sort of get a sense of exactly how much energy is being consumed, and then how we can optimize them as computer scientists so that we can get closer and closer to, for some definition of optimality, energy optimal AI. But we don't really know what is optimal, so we keep trying. So while we were at it, all these kinds of headlines started to appear. I'm sure all of you have seen many of these headlines in the last 2-3 years that AI is going to use these and that much amount of energy and it's going to take over the whole world. And in some way, they are all correct that it's going to take and consume a lot of energy. But on the other hand, we saw that if you dig deeper, many of these headlines are based on some studies. They were not necessarily actually measuring much, and they were trying to estimate based on sort of some understanding of what may or may not have happened. And then they were making these broad statements about the worst case of what is going on. So, but I will get to that in a second, but it is true that even though I just said that many of these are estimates and they're going for worst case, what we observed is that going back to even 2020, training sufficiently large model, GPT-3, with about 175 or a few hundreds of billions of parameters. Some people estimated, this estimation is actually not by OpenAI, but people at Google, they did some estimation. and they said that it roughly would have consumed 1,287 megawatt hour. And over the years, the energy consumption of those models, as they grew larger, it sort of continued to rise. And some of them are smaller because sometimes they are trained on smaller amount of data. Sometimes they are smaller because the model itself is small. So it depends on multiple factors: how much data, how big a model, how long you have trained. Because the energy consumption is essentially what is the power you have consumed over time, and then you do an integration over time, then you get, okay, this is the total energy that's been consumed. So Bloom was an open source effort, and they didn't have as much resources. It was few hundreds of megawatt hour, which itself is a big number. Amazon trained something in 2022, and I'm sure in the last 3 years they have trained a lot more that consumed about an order of magnitude more than GPT-3. And then if you go to 2024, the Llama 405 billion, it's about double that. And many of the models that we actually use, not the ones that you use locally, and many open source one, as just was mentioned, like they've been very efficient, at least in their last run, but many commercial models we use like ChatGPT and Cloud and so on, many of them nobody really knows, but the rumors are there in the trillions of parameters regime, and they can potentially consume a lot of energy. And these numbers, like just to get a sense of how big these numbers are, US Energy Information Administration, their estimate is that to get 1 megawatt hour of energy, you need to burn like 1,140 pounds of coal. So all of these numbers you multiply by that, however big mountain you can imagine, it's basically just to train that one model. But the actual consumption of AI is not just in model training. There's a lot more energy consumed in inference, because you train a model once and then 1 billion users using it tens of times in a day. So that actually ends up being much, much bigger number. And even for these numbers that I'm showing here for training, this is perhaps after they have settled on, this is a good model, and this is something we want to train to the end, then you want to put it out. That's the number that's being shown here. But machine learning often is a trial and error process, and they try many in parallel, and most of them are not as good and thrown out, and you end up with like the best candidate, and that's the one we're talking about. But even for each of these models, the actual factor should be like times 10 or times 100. Like, we don't really know, but however many things they have tried out before they have settled on, okay, this is the Llama 3.1405 billion parameter model we want to open source. And so the reason these models consume so much energy is because at its simplest form, AI and machine learning is simply a lot of data. It's essentially all the data you can get your hands onto legally and sometimes without legal permissions, and you just get everything you can. And they talk about tens of trillions of tokens that they use to train these large models. And it used to be LLM were just based on text, but we are seeing multimodal model, which is becoming more and more common. Image generation model, video generation model. So their training data sets are multiple order of magnitude bigger than text, because text is just few bytes, where an image would be many kilobytes, if not megabyte. And all of these data essentially are stored somewhere, and then we need something to go over all the data. Then we get a compute, and the computes are typically accelerators that are specialized to do highly parallel computation. The most common one is basically a GPU, which was originally designed to play video games and do graphics. People figured out to render those things, you have to do a lot of matrix operation, and the same matrix operation is used in all of these large-scale neural network training and inference. So GPUs have become very popular. I'm sure anybody, I don't know, who follows news, you see NVIDIA in the news every day now, and the whole market goes up and down with NVIDIA because they make the sort of most popular GPUs. They have 90% plus share of the world in terms of the AI hardware market. So they basically run the world at this point. So all of this compute and all of these data, they are sort of in some way using some systems are put together. And then the goal is to train a model. That's the model I talked about earlier. And there are many, many models that was mentioned before. All of these models are being trained. And so put all of these servers, we need these big warehouses. So this is a picture of, I think from Amsterdam. It's a Google data center. Not necessarily their biggest. I just picked because this is some nice colors. Most of them are just gray and white and not very interesting. But essentially, the servers that we are talking about, typically each of them will have 8 GPU. A single GPU, my student looked up yesterday, the most recent one, Blackwell 200 or 300, they consume 1 kilowatt, a single GPU, which is about the same amount of power as the refrigerator you have in your house. Maybe those are like maybe 800 to 1200, whatnot, but in the same order of magnitude in the ballpark. And a server has 8 of them, a single server. And then, so it's like 8 kilowatt of that, and then you need about 50% more to actually get the server up and running, to keep it cool, to have memory, to store, to communicate, and then you end up with about 12 kilowatt for a single server. And you put tens of thousands, 100,000 server in rows and rows of sort of racks. By rack, I mean actual racks you have in your house. Is a server goes in a rack, and then racks and racks, they are lined up in rows and rows of these racks. And they are, of course, wired and connected for power and communication and cooling. And the entire warehouse is just full of that. And that's why these data centers need a lot of energy. And so the question is like, how much energy do these data centers need? And nobody knows the real answer because it's just distributed across so many different entities and so many different, companies. There are some information available. So one of these agencies that deal with that is International Energy Agency. And so this is a plot I took from them. X-axis is time, y-axis is terawatt hour. The models we were talking about were megawatt hour, maybe gigawatt hour. Terawatt is 1,000 times more because we're talking about the global data center scale. And historically, it was not growing very quickly. It was growing slowly, but around 2020 started to pick up. And in 2024, the total estimated energy consumption of all data centers in the world was about between, I think, 300 to 400 something terawatt hour. And so that was 1.5% of the global electricity consumption. On the aggregate, still much smaller than all the energy needed to turn on all of the lights in all of our houses and buildings, all the many different kinds of industries we may have. But the rise is very sharp because it used to be below 1%, significantly below 1%. Within like 4 or 5 years, it went from that to 1.5. And the projection are sort of in the ballpark of doubling, tripling, quadrupling based on different kinds of scenarios they were trying to put in. And even in their report, they point out that these are different kinds of numbers they have found by an analysis by McKinsey or Goldman Sachs or whatever, nobody really knows, but there are a variety of estimation, but the understanding is that it is growing. It will grow very quickly for at least few years. And it's clear, given like all of the news we keep reading now, even near our sort of Ann Arbor, there's a lot of news about large data center being grown. Yes.
Do you know how much electricity is being spent on Bitcoin mining right now?
I don't know right now, but it's
about
going
the same
to
amount.
be, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's about the same amount.
I don't know. I'm not going to say it's more or less, but in the long term, it's going to be much, much smaller than AI because like Bitcoin mining, I don't think is as popular.
Bitcoin mining is turning into AI.
Yeah, I mean, all of those GPUs, I mean, so Bitcoin mining is not turning into AI. Is the computation you need to do, they can all use the same hardware, and the data centers that were perhaps built to do Bitcoin mining, now they are doing AI here because there is a lot more money to be made. Bitcoin mining, you mine and you mine and you mine, and if you are lucky, then you run into a Bitcoin, then you get some money. Here you run and you get money, and you run and you get money. There is no end to getting money. So there's a lot of people who are willing to pay to just get access of GPUs. If you go to large cloud providers, because we have to, I don't know, use them every now and then for research and running experiments, you cannot get hold of machines with GPU because all of these startups that are like valued at billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, they have reserved thousands of GPUs for like months and years ahead so that they can, I don't know, hang on to the GPU. And the reason GPU is scarce is not because of GPU itself, it's just that we don't have enough power today to turn on all the GPUs that we have today. All of these big companies, all the many, I don't know, billions of dollars they have invested, the reason they cannot actually have them, all of them running right now is that it takes, and this is actually, I don't know, I think I'm rephrasing a quote by Zuckerberg, like of all people last year in some podcast, is that it takes about 18 months, 12 to 18 months, according to him, like I want a data center and there is a data center, but it takes about 36 months to power it. So the thing that is stopping all of them to build more is there is not enough power. The money is not the problem, GPU is not the problem. The problem is we don't have enough power. And so this is going to show up in all of the departments throughout the university and throughout the nation, that power and energy is the biggest problem that we are facing and will face more and more, assuming this type of activity goes on. So some of these lines are extremely optimistic, some of them lines are pessimistic, like headwinds. The high efficiency one, my understanding is that tries to sort of say that even if we grow, if we could improve our software, our hardware, our algorithm, our usage pattern, we might be able to, I don't know, sort of slow it down, not necessarily slow down the usage of AI, but rather the energy consumption of AI. So for example, my research group works on understanding, but also optimizing this. And this is just a picture I was just looking up, and then it's from NREL, and they created a nice map of 2025, all the different data center throughout the US and how much sort of power that they are allocating, not single data center. Many of these large circles are sort of cluster of data centers. Oftentimes you will see that the data centers grow in clusters because there are particular places where you have good regulation, good access to power, good access to cooling and water, and so on and so forth. And so when someone finds that type of place, they go and basically, start building many around them. For example, Michigan clearly seems like one of those. There's a lot of data center projects being announced and rejected and so on and so forth, because it's been identified as one of these places where this kind of big data center can be built. So the one that has been proposed by OpenAI is a 1.4 gigawatt data center. And in the announcement I read, DT said it's not much. It's going to increase DT's total power delivery. I mean, they have to increase by 25% or whatever they do, and it will just one data center will increase it by 25%. And the reason they have to do it in Saline because like there is a transmission line that is already existing nearby, and they could, I don't know, take from there. Otherwise, as I said, that you would plan, but building up transmission, getting permission, and so on and so forth will take a long time. This is also sort of in some way forcing where the data center would be located. I didn't put up here, but NREL have another map where they show all the fiber optic lines and all the power transmission lines. And you could see most of these data centers are nearby those two things because you need to be connected to very high speed network to connect to the world, and you need like a lot of power. So you have to be near existing transmission line because in the US, there hasn't been much development for decades and is very slow moving. Whereas some other countries, they might be like doing it very quickly, and they have been building up sort of their power capacity for the last 20 years. So all of these matters, these energy increase and power increase, is because the rate at which the demand is growing, the supply for clean energy, renewable or whatever, is not growing as quickly. So emissions is going to rise rapidly. And also it came up before, like the global inequality, all of these things will rise, not just because someone can use a paid service, whereas I use free service, but also because when you are looking for all of these resources, these data centers automatically go toward places with more power and better connectivity, and that will be further away from places in the world who don't really have that type of existing infrastructure. And that will also, I don't know, create this type of gap. And one of the good news here is that many of these models coming out of China, they are much smaller and still very capable. And that type of small language model, people are calling them instead of large language models. So SLMs might be the way where people would be able to still get some without I don't know, having all of this thing. But this is only true as long as we are having this open source model. If you notice, not many open source models are coming out of US anymore, because I think they are feeling that they are ahead. And when I think the people who are releasing open source, they also feel like they have caught up. And now they are actually releasing their secrets, then they will also stop releasing. And then there is a very good chance there will be no open source model. Universities cannot train them because even when we say it's 10x cheaper, that money we also don't have, like throwing $10 million or $20 million to try out and then say, okay, it doesn't work. And then let's throw another 10. We cannot even throw $10,000 at something. It's very difficult. And so these are, again, more sort of news and whatnot, but the problem that's happening because of this demand is that even in the US, many planned decommissioning of coal power plants have been pushed back because they want to add more supply of energy. And they want to, many different big companies are looking into nuclear power. They are trying to turn on the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor. Many are proposing small modular reactor. So all of these things will have different implications on the society and public. But we believe in the ML Energy Initiative that we can do better by focusing on decreasing the demand. We can increase supply and people will keep doing it, but as we saw in the projection, there is a way where we can have more efficient, more energy efficient, energy optimal ideally, AI stack that will reduce the demand of this AI. Of course, one extreme solution, everybody can say we start fasting and don't use AI. That's never going to happen. It's out of the bottle and you cannot put it back. So what we can do is focusing on the models, the algorithms, the software stack, the hardware stack, a full co-design of the entire vertical sort of that the AI deals with, and how can we optimize it. And so what we've been doing is, one, as I said at the beginning, we wanted to understand very precisely, not sort of over-exaggerate like that, okay, this is going to take over the more energy than the world has and so on and so forth. It just cannot happen by economics. Like at some point it's going to be too expensive. And when they start charging, they cannot provide it for free, or the free one will be very poor quality or very expensive. Then all of us will stop using or do something about it. So it cannot just grow forever. So there is no need for scaremongering and giving out this random estimation. So we build tools that can measure precisely. We also have been doing a lot of work to optimize the entire life cycle. And then what we have also done is find these trade-offs between quality of a model and energy it takes or time it takes to train the model. So depending on your use case, our goal is to enable all of the users to decide that, okay, for this particular thing, I don't need that big of a complicated model, it's just high. Whereas like this one requires reading 30 papers and then writing a 20-page review, and that has to be fact-checked and so on and so forth. That one is probably okay to spend a lot of energy because, I mean, it's not easy task. And so how do you sort of navigate the trade-off and do something about it? So this is like the only slide I have with a lot of data going on. We don't have to think about the data. What I want to say by understanding, I mean, is that actually measuring a lot of these open source models that are available, and this is from like a few months ago. We are currently running another run of the ML Energy benchmark, like in November. It'll be released in December. That will include all of these newer models like QN2 and DeepSeek R1 and all of the things that was mentioned earlier. But essentially what we have found is that if you look at these models, don't worry about like what is the actual numbers. Y-axis is showing normalized power draw when you are running an average query on this model, on average, how much power they can draw. The takeaway here is that many of the estimations are based on assuming all the models can draw 100% of the available power. As you can see, many of the models are around 30-40%, some of them 50%, few are crossing 90%. And the models here, LLMs for chat or code generation, all of this kind of model are memory bound, meaning they cannot use all of the available computing power in a GPU. That's why they draw less power. Whereas as you go to multimodal, they have to deal with images and videos to understand them or generate images and videos. Those type of things, many of you may have like used the Sora 2 app on iPhone or maybe have seen something on social network. Those things, video generations, they actually can exercise all of the available compute on a GPU and they consume a lot more power. And the reason we wanted to do it because we wanted to just get a sense of where things are to inform people, and which led to sort of maintaining these ML Energy leaderboard. Our website is ml.energy/leaderboard. If you go there, it has the version 2 of the leaderboard, like the numbers that I am showing, but soon we'll be doing a V3 release with newer hardware and all the new models that have come out in last like 8-9 months, and then and it will also look prettier. Currently, the website is just very quickly put together, but as we are seeing more and more attention from people about these numbers, and they're using in many different scenarios, in many different ways, we are putting in more efforts to make it more usable and accessible to people. Just to give some example, our work has led to sort of this big expose on MIT Tech Review this summer, where we worked with them for maybe 5-6 months to analyze a bunch of models' energy consumption. And so they wanted to, the reporters, both of them, James and Casey, they started with like the same hypothesis, like, is it true? Everybody keeps saying it's going to take over the whole world and so on. How much exactly does it consume? So they were looking around, they found us, so we worked together and put in some numbers. So they talk about, but numbers are still very large. I'm not saying it's like not large, but it's not as large as it's off by 2x, 3x. In some estimations, it could be off by 10x, which doesn't make it negligible, and we should stop talking about it. It's just that we need to have a nuanced discussion between where things are and how can we make things better instead of taking either extreme. Because one extreme you are seeing is that, yeah, AI is fine, it's never going to do any problem, it's like all good. The other one is like, we should not even go near it, it's so bad, it's going to destroy everything. Like any technology is probably somewhere in the middle, it's unclear which side it leans on, but it's not all good and all bad. Nothing is all good and all bad. The other thing that has happened with our work, sort of big companies like Google, they have been now following our methodology. So this is something that came out at the end of summer from Google. Their hardware is different, but like they actually, I don't know, did the work, then they reached out to us to talk about this is the methodology and this is how it differs from your methodology and so on. And it turns out they have actually improved over our methodology because they have access to a real data center, whereas ours are like running on the cloud. So we have some sort of blind spots that they fixed. And I will go quickly. This one I'm not trying to explain. It will take forever, but essentially in terms of optimization, what we do is top left is the training that happens today. Only thing you need to care about are the colors. So when it's closer to orange and red, that's like drawing a lot of power. When it's closer to blue, it's drawing less power. And what we have done, we have found that the blue line, the boxes under the blue line, they are the ones that dictate how long training takes. And so what we did is that we can automatically find the blue line, keep them fully running with the power they were consuming before, but we reduce the power consumption of everybody outside the critical path. And that way, without actually losing any speed of training, we showed that you can reduce energy consumption by up to 30%. We are working on our paper right now, which we'll be submitting next month. We have found that you can reduce another 15-20% on top of it. And so that's why I was saying that there is a lot of opportunity to, I don't know, while it's trying to go up energy consumption, we can also try to pull it down by doing, and this is only just software work without any hardware and algorithmic changes. And this has led to a lot of this kind of articles and news, but most importantly, this led to NVIDIA reaching out to us that they have read this paper and they want to figure out whether they can use our technique in their, I don't know, system. And they actually tried out our things in their own cluster, and then it sort of runs now. We are collaborating with them to translate like our research into NVIDIA, because everybody in the world is on NVIDIA. And so hopefully, if we are lucky and things work out, a lot of people will be able to get, if not 30%, even 3% of gigawatt is a lot. So something will trickle down to people eventually, hopefully. So I just have a couple slides left. Basically, I think because of all these data centers, from a public health perspective, there's a lot of attention that's needed in terms of how these data centers affect people in the communities nearby. There are, again, only very polarized views, but I am very much a believer of measuring things and then saying it's good or bad instead of presupposing something should be good or bad. And I think people in this room, in this building, in this department, school can actually do a better job in understanding the health impact, the impact on air and water. And then once you have better understanding, you can actually advise policy makers one way or the other, and what is the limit or how big of a data center should even be allowed, where. All of these things, I think, needs a lot of input from people like you, who have the expertise to analyze this kind of data and then connect it to health and other factors, and then educate and empower communities. There's a lot of protests. Some of them are right. Some of them, I don't know whether they have all the information. But in general, I think whatever discussion and for or against we do should be based on real data and measurements and understanding, instead of just saying it's like all good and all bad. So the ML Energy team is all of these people, many of my PhD students and some my colleagues and a lot of undergrad and master students. They've been building all of these things. The tool is called Zeus, where all of these things are implemented inside. You can, it's an open source project. I would end with by saying that Zeus is a tool that can measure any computation running on GPU, so it doesn't necessarily have to be AI. And so even though we started building it AI, I have colleagues who are measuring energy consumption of database, energy consumption of secure computation that are running on GPU. And so similarly, whatever types of thing you do, it's very easy to use, like measuring time. You say begin and end, and then you do your thing, and then Zeus can give you, this is how many joules. And I'm saying this because I feel like as a society, we need to make energy a first-class primitive in the things that we do and work that we do. Like we have a sense of time, and I'm over time, and everybody is thinking, okay, he's running late. Similarly, we should have this peer pressure that, okay, this thing they are doing, that research, that model, is consuming more energy, and they should go and try to, reduce it without even having to tell them. If everybody knows, then everybody will automatically start thinking about it, except for a few. But most of the people would try to conform to social norms, and they will say, okay, this is like too much energy to spend. And then I think we'll have a better chance of going to a greener and better future. I will stop there. Thank you so much.
I guess now we can move to the panel session. And yeah, if people have questions, go ahead and raise your hand and ask.
I have a question about, so like using the AI. So like first, like I just like saw like Sam Altman posting like stop saying thank you to the chat bot to save the energy. So I like, based on my understanding of the recurrent neural network, it's like the prompt is like longer, which means like the more energy like they need to use to digest like the prompt, right? So what do you think of like the trade-off, like like long prompt engineering, which describe the problem real specific with like shorter prompt that can help to save the energy, to save the API?
Okay, that's a very good question, and I will try to finish it quickly. First of all, these are almost all of them, actually all of them currently a transformer or transformer-based model, not RNN. And then when you give a prompt, first thing it does is analyze the whole prompt. That's very compute heavy, similar to video and that type of workload. And the smaller the prompt, the smaller energy they consume. So if you could express your problem more succinctly, it will consume less energy. 2 words probably will not make that big of a dent, but say having a PDF uploaded of 200 pages versus like you only need a couple pages of information and uploading those 2 pages, there will be a significant difference in terms of time taken as well as energy consumed. The other part is many of the models we have found are chatty, and some models are sort of have very short answers. The ones that talk more consume more energy, because they have to produce more and more tokens. So it's a function of many things. It's very hard to control or know how much ChatGPT or other things do, because all of these measurements are open source model, because we are in control of the GPU where it is running. But like unless OpenAI or Google, they actually tell you how much it is, there is no way of knowing for us like exactly what they do. So the work is to encourage them that, okay, it's fine talking about it. And there are tools to actually do it. Thank you.
Well, we have someone online with their hand up. Shall I ask them to unmute?
Here, let's, yeah, sure. Sure, we'll take that one and then we'll introduce the rest of the panel.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Elijah. I'm a PhD student in bioinformatics, and I just wanted to kind of challenge the notion that of, for example, like communities protesting or like people writing articles and warning about energy consumption of like AI, and maybe taking the worst stance possible, or like the worst case scenario to heart, which I understand could be like, how do I say, like not reflecting the true, like not reflecting all the data that is out there. But I wonder if some of the blame should go to companies that are actually have not been transparent in reporting their energy usage. So like what can people do like besides assumptions and estimations when the companies and like in data centers are not necessarily transparent about their data usage and their energy usage, especially because yes.
Yeah, now I completely agree. So there is no regulation to force them. Unless there is regulation, there is no way you can force any of these companies to, I don't know, just give out these numbers. They can give out these numbers just to show that they are more efficient than others. Then I don't know, expect that maybe people will stop using the ones like that don't talk about, and some other AI that have actually, I don't know, talked something about. For example, I would guess that's one of the reasons Google at least gave out some number and described how they calculated those numbers. So there is some credibility, as opposed to, say, for example, like for OpenAI, Sam Altman had a tweet. The tweet said, okay, this is this many watt hour, without any description of how they even came up with the number, which may very well be very well thought out and done. But then some are taking, I don't know, more time and effort to explain than some others. But in general, I think the problem is without actual policy changes and regulations, there is no incentive for any of these companies to give out any of these things. And maybe all of these protests and such will be an incentive for them, that they will think about, okay, we can solve all of this problem by giving out clear numbers, and the numbers are already good, and people will listen to them, which might also work out. The reason we are doing this work is to encourage everybody to publish the numbers, also look at the numbers, and then whatever discussion is around numbers and without any sentiment of anything. It's just numbers, and it measures something. It measures people are dying, then we should be worried. It measures people are getting healthy, we should do more of it, and find a balance across all of these things. It's a very difficult problem. Without numbers, like it's just like everybody shouting at the cloud. Well, I mean, here cloud happens to be where all the AI runs anyway. Yeah, I will end there. But I completely agree with your point that, okay, there's a lot of blame on, I don't know, the companies as well, just to, I don't know, just give out number and have some transparency. The problem is the regulations that we have, they are not about energy, they're about this carbon and so on. The problem with carbon, and historically I am very anti-carbon, is carbon allows people to hide You can do carbon offsetting, then you can say I am net negative until 2050 into the future. And all of these things are actually made up. It's just people with a lot of money saying that I can solve my problem by paying someone else and not really taking any accountability and responsibility. Actually having like requirement of putting out your energy and power numbers is better because you directly have to pay an electricity bill. Even big companies have to pay electricity bills to some grid. And so it's very hard to hide from there. Carbon accounting and all of the things that has happened in terms of sustainability for decades allowed actually sort of all of the trouble we are in right now because it gave all the accounting tricks in the books to hide behind layers and layers and layers of obfuscation. And then you go to somewhere in Africa and they have no trees planted. Even though like someone took the money and it's been, I don't know, calculated that everybody is negative, nobody has any problem. And so I will stop there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, like I'm taking.
Before we do our panel, I'd like to thank our two speakers again. This has been really awesome. And now, so this is supposed to end at 12, but if anyone, I feel like there's a lot to talk about. So if you have to pop out at 12, feel free. If anyone
introduce the two
additional
speakers.
If we can stay a few minutes after, then also feel free to do that if people have a lot of questions. So can we introduce the two people we haven't met yet today, Dr. Athey and Dr. Colacino?
Go for it.
Hi, I'm Brian Athey. Some people would.
And I can hear you on Zoom.
Some people would say that I'm obsessed with AI, and they'd probably be right about it. And it's a multifactorial problem. And there's as many. But one thing that's emerged, and I've been teaching this class with AJ, who you see is fantastic. One thing that's really emerging is, and we saw the theme from the beginning. I used to talk about Dickens. It's the best of times and it's the worst of times. And there's positive things and there's negative things, including up to and including the world coming to an end stuff. I mean, it's a serious conversation. I don't know how many people saw the SACUA vote on AI, which was 86%, that we needed a comprehensive strategy to deal with AI and to actually be honest about all the risks, including the environmental risks that you've talked about, openly and transparently. Let me just say one more thing. One thing that came out a couple of days ago in a conversation with the TIBS group over in medical school. There's 14 graduate programs. My bioinformatics graduate program is part of that. There was a survey. Was only about 83 of about 800. It's only about 11% respondents of students and postdocs. So you have to say that. But 20% of the students and PIPs are opting out of using any AI for various reasons, including environmental concern. And so that's just something that I think we've got to be talking about a little bit. And it's a conversation that we're having. And so I think I would just say the one thing that we did that was a mistake at the University of Michigan is we got in early, we wrote a report, we put it up on the web, we opened up UMGPT, and then we said, we got the problem solved. And that's not, for better or for worse, we've got to be tracking this every day, every week. This morning, Gemini 3 with the UI feature, I just texted AJ this, was released. And it is a phenomenal increase in the capability, well over GPT 5.1 and Anthropic. And it is as much a gift as it is a threat. So I really believe that we've got to all come together and continue to see how this changes our work in higher ed, the research, the education, and everything that we do.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I'm Justin Colacino, so I'm faculty here in public health. So I'm a wet lab scientist. So a lot of the AI-based work that we've been doing is in service of the type of data that our lab generates. So a lot of more of these like fit-for-purpose models you guys were talking about that still seem like they consume a lot of energy because we're like running a lot of these locally on servers. But I can just highlight three really quick and then sort of like think about the broader implications of what we're talking about. So in the area of like single cell RNA sequencing, there's some really cool models that help us like differentiate cells from droplets, for instance. And we have these like new methods for DNA sequencing that like Dana and Jackie are also quite interested. I'm sure the folks at
we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, so it's like we
transforming the wet lab.
It's like amazing. So like nanopore-based sequencing.
Yeah, this is what we're doing too.
Yeah, so just like being able to like take these electrical impedance signals and use these like really great models to like understand like DNA modifications and RNA modifications in these ways that we could never before. And then we're doing a lot of like high content imaging based analyses. Some of these like models are incredible, but you know these fit for purpose models. And what I do worry about, and like you got like, so it sounds like PIBS has like 20% of students that aren't using it. Maureen like whispered like, oh, it could be higher in EHS. And I also have an appointment in programming the environment. Students are pretty hesitant for a lot of this stuff. So thinking about like, how do we balance this? And I think it gets to like Junkie's question too. How do we like balance this out where there's like the ethical component? These are extremely powerful. There's this huge environmental impact.
Right.
Where do we land as a university on these complex issues? So it was like really great to hear you guys present on so like the excitement, the challenges, the environmental implications. So I think this has been a great session.
Yeah. To follow up on one of the last comments, like don't say thank you to the afterward, but one of the things that I found is so simple. Just say, please keep your answer brief. Put that in the end of your prompt. It makes a huge difference. It's the difference between getting like 2 pages worth of text and 2 lines of text. But you know, is that just a tiny drop in the bucket? You know, not really making a difference overall. But I guess my view is, you know, I've used these things enough to get intuition of when they're useful, when they're not, when to watch out, when to I use it mainly for things that I know the answer to already. And so I can kind of fact check it in my own head. And so then I can limit my use of them to when I think that they will be very useful to me, right? But you need to use it to a certain extent to begin with to know when that's the case.
So I have a question to start, then we'll get to some in the chat too. As an academic, I've been kind of concerned about how this will make the rat race even faster. So now we'll be like expected to be more productive because, hey, you could write your whole background section of your grant with AI or something. So maybe now, and then modify it. So then maybe now you should submit like 3 grants a cycle. And if they're not, there's going to be people doing that. And then people maybe like me that are not doing that yet. So, you know, how do you see like balancing this? Yeah, as an academic, I feel like there's already a lot of expectations and AI could help, but it could also make it like even crazier. So what are your thoughts on that?
That's absolutely true. There's just absolutely no question about it. It came out, one thing that we did with the PIBS is we have 3 subcommittees, and then that rolls up to a small number of us that are kind of managing the thing to try to get some, policies in place, thinking about assessment and classes all the way across the board, use in the labs and so on. And there's a gal named Heather down in Pio, can't remember her last name. She was really thoughtful and talked about, just what you said, that, the students have to review 20 papers and, come up with a summary. And that would take, a week or 2 to do. But you could do it, quite quickly with generative AI and quite efficiently. I mean, the idea of hallucinations has really changed over the period of time, and you can really do a pretty good job to keep find the right references and that kind of stuff. So it becomes back to the people that are not using it. There's a distinct disadvantage to those folks, and it's real, and it's going to increase, and so okay. So let's just jump to the dissertation. So how about that first chapter of the dissertation? Putting aside the rest of the dissertation. And we're already Maureen and I talked about this. I mean, we're seeing this come into the use of the dissertations. One of the things that I was in Singapore last week, and they had a really good article in the Singapore Straits Times it's more towards companies and just saying that in companies, just like at the university, if we don't have clear guidelines for how we should be able to use it appropriately and what platforms and this kind of stuff. Right now we have pretty kind of superficial guidelines. And there's a lot of things that are left to the instructors and left to the individual laboratories and stuff like that. And one thing that came out in the discussion was that not many PIs are actually having conversations with their students about the use of it in the lab and on theses and stuff like that, which I guess that kind of shocked me a little bit because I've got a lab like Justin, and we're using the AI for everything to take those signals out and organize. It is incredible, in terms of data management, workflow processes, summarizing the data and stuff like that. We're getting stuff done so much faster and more efficiently right now with the AI. So I think it's got to be, it would be, I think, foolhardy in a lot of cases not to use it. But, I think we need to be systematic in thinking about the appropriate use. And I can only tell you, as Maureen knows, I spend a lot of my time over in the hospital side with clinical departments and electronic health records and clinical research and all that. There are other, elements of the ethics there, having to do with, being transparent about how are we using this, summarizing tool, that we upload into Epic. What do we tell our patients we're doing with AI and so on and so on and so on. And then the privacy concerns and all this kind of stuff. So actually, what's happening here in this workshop is fantastic. We got to do more of this. That's what I think.
Can I ask a quick question to you? Has Michigan Medicine reached out to you, Zeus? Are they using that?
No.
No.
No, but now I know. So.
Think about it, Brian.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was sharing with Justin that we have something called IT modernization, and we've moved. We're just in the final stages of moving all the servers for Epic and everything. We've got a 2 megawatt machine room up at North Campus, the North Campus Data Center, which we're largely decommissioning and moving into the cloud. And so we have one instance in Chicago and one instance in Virginia. So we got a dual connect because we can't go down. But but we're struggling right now. We had conversations yesterday. Spent half my day yesterday before I went to Chicago just talking about how to accommodate different departments like the emergency department. What kind of specialized AI do we need to put in there, and how do we build out the system and keep it safe and secure and stuff. So I wanted AJ to talk about the grading.
In what way?
Well, I was down on campus talking to the guys down there. And so there's these big humanity courses. And so everybody's writing essays with generative AI, and then they have bots doing the grading. And they'll have 10 sections where they have 10 different bots doing the grading, and the grading in the one section is like this and so on. This is the kind of stuff that's happening. It's like an arms race. It's happening right now. We've seen examples of, I won't say which school, what courses, where, couldn't afford a GSI, so they've got bots. CSCAR got closed. I could show you a good demonstration of bots that could do most of CSCAR. We built that one. There's all kinds of examples. So the question is, where do you... We are in an augmented situation now where we are not going to be able to. People say, "Oh, I'm not using any AI." Well, they're sitting there typing into Google. It's like, really?
You can't turn that off. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question for Mosharaf. So I really like the ML.energy. So how much energy does that cost to run a meter? So
it consumes a lot of energy. Yeah, because you have to run it multiple times to get a reasonable sort of error bound that it is actually there and it's not getting affected by other things. And so you have to waste a lot of energy to get these energy numbers.
Good point. I need a website.
Yeah, I mean, we have all the numbers. We can put it up there, which is actually not a bad idea, that this is how much energy was consumed. Then we can start that, because I mean, we are always measuring, and basically anything we run, it's automatically measured. It's very lightweight. So you just, I don't know, say begin, and then you say end at the end, and then it just like sits and doesn't really affect whatever you were running. And then you get some number at the end. Okay, this is how many joules. It directly uses the counters in the hardware of NVIDIA GPUs or AMD GPU or Intel CPU like it supports a bunch of hardware. So it sort of uses their direct counters. And these counters are pretty reliable. They're not 100% accurate, but they're within about 5% of like what is the actual number, because these are like discrete counter as opposed to having like oscilloscope on it. And so like, but yeah, long story short is that we consume a lot of energy to produce it. Currently, we are burning like $20,000+ just to create the new V3 leaderboard on like H200 and B200 GPUs. Because like, I don't know, you want to run it and create the up-to-date numbers like where they are. Someone had to do the dirty work.
I wonder, energy is one dimension. You also have the water consumption.
Yeah.
You also have the mineral loss.
Yeah.
To make the chips.
Yeah.
So I wonder, all these dimensions, I believe, falls into the environmental health kind of realm. I wonder, for example, based on your experience, is energy basically the biggest, most measurable, because that's tied to money. So that's probably the dimension people are trying to really get clear how much you can save. What's that compared to the water cooling, water consumption, compared to the mineral loss? Because, in the world, people spend 900 billion gallons of water to flush the toilets.
The water is huge. I mean, that.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And so there are like a bunch of studies on the full life cycle assessment of like a whole data center. Actually, Google has a very nice paper where I think the paper is called I forgot, some variation of cradle to the grave. Like from where the chips come, and whatever this thing coming from, then you put them in, then you run it 5 years, then you decommission it at the end, because there is also cost associated with getting rid of these things. You cannot just, I don't know, dump them anywhere. So there are people who looked at the whole life cycle of this thing. I mean, even in at UM, like in SES, like what do you call them?
School Sustainability.
School of Environmental.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of faculty who do this life cycle analysis. In terms of water and energy, these are more like operational usage when it is running. Many of the things you mentioned, like the minerals, those are like before things got an operational, so they go into the capital expenditure part of like buying the chips, building the chips, building the building, and then putting them in. But after you power them, that's all like operational. And I think like in that Google paper, they talked about it. The whole life cycle used to, get a lot of attention, but I think they claim that actually the operational is the much bigger part than the things before and things after. In the operational, the two big components are energy and water. The difference between water and energy is that energy you can measure live, like this type of software, where water, when it's used, is for cooling, and depending on what kind of cooling you use. So it's very hard to measure from like where things are actually running, but it's a function of like the physical building where like the cooling is organized so that either through airflow or liquid cooling or whatever kind of cooling they're doing, that sort of goes there. So it's very difficult to measure water directly, unlike energy. And that's why like we are doing energy and we're not doing water. There are some studies on water that relies on sort of these reports, environmental report that all of these companies publish once a year. And then they write down somewhere, okay, this many billion, trillion, whatever gallons of water they used like last year and something. And based on that, like some people have tried to estimate. The Google August report that I mentioned is not just about energy. They also mention water. And I forgot, but they actually write down like a average query is 0.24 watt hour or something energy-wise, but it's like 1 teaspoon of water or something. Or like 2 teaspoons.
4 million gallons a day for 140 megawatts at the Ypsilanti Township site.
Yeah, but then...
So we've got to be honest about the water piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a lot of water consumption, yes.
We've got to be honest
But
about it.
at the individual level, it's very hard to tie back. You can calculate at the aggregate level, whatever is running, we don't care. But this is how much water is going. Similarly, however much like electricity has been allocated.
There's a lot of different kinds of, there's evaporative cooling, there's closed circuit, there's all kinds of different methods. And so what we need are sustainable methods that are not consumptive of water. And especially the evaporative cooling is very bad. Because it goes right in, it takes the water in and it sucks it out of the atmosphere and it's gone. It goes somewhere else. It rains.
Most of the modern data centers don't really do evaporative.
There's several that do, and several that are planned.
They shouldn't be, I guess, being allowed to build that.
I would agree with you. That's what I'm saying.
Because, you can do liquid immersive cooling and closed loop systems as opposed to sending water somewhere.
So it's just it's another big factor, and noise and light. These are all big factors.
Other questions? More questions on here?
The question on Zoom, they're mostly comments or questions. We kind of got to the
okay,
but
I think Alicia has a question, like not a question but a comment.
Yeah, Alicia.
What is the
so if you're searching on Google and you don't want to use AI, you can say minus AI. I don't use it. But Alicia's got a couple of other good.
Oh, you can actually in your prompt say minus AI
on there too.
I think also what are the risks of using the well actually personally I have a question for everyone in the panel. Like what is the thing that you pretty trust that you can use AI to do, and what is the task you will don't let AI use AI to do? Like for me, I'm a data scientist, so something I can use AI is to ask him for some code to visualize some plot, so I can check it, and I'm pretty trust like whether it's like to show it's correct or not. And also I feel it's have done a pretty bad job in like for statistical analysis, like to use which model to be applied for statistical analysis. I wonder, like, do you have any, would you like to share some of your opinion on that?
Yeah, I can start by saying that in general, these tools are not very good at math, and that shows a lot. Math, physics, that type of thing. While they're getting better, I think that's their largest weakness overall. And I would not trust them as a calculator by any means. I've tried it many times, and I have many different examples to show of how it gets it wrong. And then I think another thing that I don't really enjoy using it for is trying to visually interpret something. Like it's really good at making that boilerplate code for a visualization. And it has gotten better at interpreting the plots, but it still doesn't have that context to understand what it really means outside of saying, oh, this red circle is larger than this blue circle, and it's in the lower quadrant or something like that. It can make all of those surface level analyses, but it can't really do the context level expertise type of work that's required that you or I would do. In terms of something that I use it for that I think it's really well at is just mass summarization. I think it's really great at that in general. And boilerplate code, although it can hallucinate and make some issues, I think being that it's kind of trained on those languages, it does a pretty good job overall. And it does a really, really nice job of annotation for code as well. I think that's a really key benefit.
So AJ, we'll have to talk about the math. I mean, arithmetic, it's not very good at, but we've actually had a lot of success with advanced math. And I spent, I was over at Berkeley at the Dr. Smale's 95th birthday. He's a Fields medalist and one of the leading mathematicians in the world. And I spent a lot of time with folks across the world talking about doing advanced math with AI and, leveraging Wolfram and all the rest of it. And they were doing a lot of good work with it. And I sat down.
What to use, what prompt to use.
Yeah, it's just though we could talk about that.
That's also more theory driven too.
But because even you can see in the lab meetings, I mean, it's just been doing some nice stuff developing math for us. But I'm very nervous about it being a therapist. We've got I'm also in the psychiatry department, and there's something called AI psychosis. It's a real thing. We're doing faculty hire in AI psychosis right now. And, there's been several teens that have committed suicide, has relied on AI as a therapist. And AI, it's not your friend. It's not a good therapist. And unfortunately, a lot of people are using it that way, and I think it's really dangerous.
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, that's tied to access or lack of access to a real health provider.
Yeah.
And then
Oh God, yeah, no, there's a reason for
and
it.
then also an epidemic of loneliness too.
Yeah, no, it's all tied in there.
Yeah.
I'm not questioning why people do it, but I think it's very difficult to justify it right now, especially for kids.
Yeah.
So two problems I've seen with it, maybe you have ways to get around this, but one is that it's really bad at critically reading literature. So oftentimes, kind of around the periphery of my expertise when I'm trying to learn how does my expertise relate to something else, I'll ask it questions and it'll, I'll like perplexity, I'll use which you didn't mention. It'll give links to sites. I'll go check, and then 75% of the time I'll have a reason. Oh, but that's not really quite what I'm looking for.
By the way,
Quite the same context. It's not really a good journal. I don't really believe the results that they got. So that's one thing. Also, I've had a lot of issues with it. It's not good with time. Like when we're just talking to each other, you say, what's the requirements for writing this part of the grant or something? Of course, we mean right now, what are the requirements? It'll spit back what the requirements were a year ago. And I think that's improving, but it's still not good at recognizing you're asking about right now.
It's I don't know if you saw a couple of days ago, it went viral. And I was going to send it to you. Gemini 3, when it first came out, could not tell you it was 2025. Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, it couldn't tell you what year it was. We were. There you go. That's an example of some of the stuff you're talking about. And it, by the way, it wasn't doing very good with 1 + 1 either.
It's like really good theoretical field level now. Can't do arithmetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to build upon what the panel was mentioning, I think AI is very good at obfuscating waste and inefficiency in a way, at least my opinion, is that it does that well. And also spreading misinformation by compounding these sources in a way that might not be accurate sometimes. It can get better at it, but my analogy is when we were doing computing with punch cards, right? There you could see where the inefficiency was happening. You could see the bottleneck that was time or computing resources. As we got more time and computing resources, we were wasting them because newer programming languages and now AI on top of them, it's obfuscating what's inefficient. And when we're using it for coding, again, it can give us code that works and does the computing, but it does nothing about the efficiency of that code. And people will use the code because it works, not because it's efficient. And never ask the AI, give me efficient code. We'll say, give me code that works.
Oh yeah, sure.
So
yeah.
That's a good.
Definitely.
That's a good hint.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but thank you so much to our speakers and panelists. Let's give them another round of applause.